Captain Hyenwoo's fingers moved across the holographic display with practiced precision, his dark eyes scanning the endless stream of data flowing through his reconnaissance ship's advanced sensors. The silent observer hung motionless in the void between stars, its hull-absorbing light and energy signatures to remain invisible to any passing vessels. For 3 months, he had been monitoring the Outer Rim territories, tracking the movements of various alien fleets, and documenting their activities for Earth's growing intelligence network. The bridge around him hummed with quiet efficiency. A small crew of 12 specialists working at their stations with the focused dedication that had made humanity's exploration vessels legendary for their thoroughness. The ship itself was a marvel of human engineering, sleek, compact, and packed with surveillance technology that could detect a whisper across a solar system. Lieutenant Sujin, his communications officer, looked up from her console with a frown, creasing her youthful features. "Captain, I'm picking up some unusual transmission patterns from the Nexus 7 system. The signals are fragmented, but they appear to be distress calls." Hyenwoo nodded, his expression remaining calm despite the spike of concern in his chest. Nexus 7 was home to the Zelthara, a peaceful species of tall, graceful beings who had been among the first to establish friendly relations with Earth's expanding diplomatic corps. Their colony represented everything that was good about interstellar cooperation, a thriving community of scientists, artists, and philosophers who had built a paradise on a world that had once been nothing but barren rock. "Bring us closer. But maintain stealth protocols," he ordered. "I want to know what's happening before we reveal ourselves." The silent observer began its careful approach to the Nexus 7 system, its engines producing no detectable emissions as it glided through space like a ghost. The journey took 2 hours, during which the distress signals grew stronger and more desperate. By the time they reached the system's outer edge, the transmissions were painting a picture that made Hyenwoo's blood run cold. "Captain Sujin," reported, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "I'm receiving multiple emergency broadcasts from the surface. It sounds like they're under attack." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the Nexus 7 system in all its former glory. The planet itself was a jewel of blue and green, its surface dotted with the elegant spires and crystalline structures that marked Zelthara architecture. 3 moons orbited the world, each one supporting research stations and mining operations. That had made the colony prosperous and self-sufficient. But now, that paradise was burning. Massive alien vessels hung in orbit around Nexus 7, like mechanical vultures, their hulls gleaming with the harsh angles and brutal efficiency of pure military engineering. The ships were unlike anything in Earth's databases, kilometer-long dreadnoughts that bristled with weapons arrays, their surfaces crawling with the mechanical appendages of automated repair systems. Smaller vessels swarmed around them like deadly insects, their sleek forms diving toward the planet's surface to deliver death from above. "My God," whispered Navigator Taehyun from his station. "Those are Krillian warships. I've heard stories about them from the outer colonies, but I never thought they were real." Hyenwoo felt his stomach drop as he recognized the distinctive design patterns of the Krillian Empire Machina Mented, alien race that had become the stuff of nightmares across 3 galaxies. The Krillians were efficient, ruthless, and utterly committed to their goal of exterminating all organic life in the universe. They saw biological beings as inferior, chaotic, and ultimately expendable, obstacles to their vision of a perfectly ordered cosmos. The tactical display updated as the silent observer's sensors gathered more data, and the picture that emerged was devastating. 57 Krillian vessels occupied the system, ranging from massive capital ships to swarms of fighter bombers. Against them, the Zelthara had managed to deploy perhaps a dozen defensive satellites and a handful of civilian vessels hastily converted for combat. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. "Captain, incoming transmission from the surface," Sujin announced, her voice breaking slightly. "It's on the emergency frequency." The voice that filled the bridge was beautiful and tragic, carrying the musical tones that made Zelthara's speech. It sounded like poetry even in the midst of horror. Commander Myung, one of the colony's military leaders, was broadcasting from what sounded like an underground bunker as explosions echoed in the background. This is Commander Myung of the Nexus 7. Defense Force, she said, her words punctuated by the sound of weapons, fire, and screaming. We are under attack by Krillian forces. Our defensive systems have been overwhelmed. The orbital platforms are gone. They're hunting us with machines that can see through our stealth fields. The transmission wavered as something massive impacted near her position, and when Myung spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who knew she was about to die. Our children, ... They took the children first. Said they were eliminating future threats to their expansion. We tried to evacuate, but their hunter-killer drones are everywhere. Move like shadows, striking without warning. Hyeon-woo watched. The tactical display as red dots marked the positions of Krillian ground forces systematically sweeping across the planet's surface. The enemy was using advanced plasma cannons to turn entire city blocks into molten glass, while they're AI-controlled. Mechs hunted down survivors with the patience of machines that felt no fatigue or mercy. Please, Myung continued, her transmission growing weaker as interference from the orbital bombardment increased. If anyone receives this message, know that we fought with honor. We fought for our families, our homes, our right to exist, but we are no match for their technology. They have weapons that seem to bend physics itself, armor that repairs itself, and minds that calculate death with mathematical precision. The sound of her position being overrun filled the bridge, mechanical. Voices speaking in the harsh, synthetic language of the Krillian Empire. Myung's final words were barely audible above the chaos. Tell the galaxy. Tell them that the Zelthera lived and loved and hoped for better days. Tell them we were not afraid to die for what we believed in. The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge of the silent observer in stunned silence. Hyeon-woo stared at the tactical display, his mind racing as he processed the implications of what they had just witnessed. The Krillian Empire had found the Nexus 7 system, and they were in the process of wiping out one of the galaxy's most peaceful civilizations. Captain Tactical Officer Ginho reported, his voice carefully controlled. Long-range sensors are detecting additional Krillian fleets moving through this sector. It appears they're conducting a systematic extermination campaign. Nexus 7 is just the beginning. Hyeon-woo felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. His reconnaissance ship was equipped with the most advanced stealth technology Earth had ever developed, but it was still just one small vessel against an entire invasion fleet. The silent observer carried a crew of 12 sophisticated sensor arrays, and enough firepower to handle pirates or raiders, not a genocidal army equipped with weapons that could crack planets. Sir, Communications Officer Soo-jin said quietly, I'm receiving emergency signals from our other reconnaissance ships in the sector. The Deep Watcher and the Void Seeker are reporting similar attacks on civilian colonies. Krillians are hitting everywhere at once. The full scope of the disaster began to dawn on Hyeon-woo as he realized that his small fleet of 6 human reconnaissance vessels was the only military force within 50 light-years of the unfolding massacre. The main Earth defense fleet was weeks away, responding to threats in other sectors. The Galactic Council's forces were scattered across hundreds of systems. Dealing with their own crises, they were alone, outnumbered 50-1, facing an enemy that had already demonstrated its ability to crush civilizations with terrifying efficiency. The Krillians had cloaking devices that made their ships nearly invisible, eye-controlled weapons that never missed their targets, and hunter-killer drones that could track their prey across continents. But as Hyeon-woo watched the final death throes of the Zelthera colony, he felt something ignite in his chest, a flame of determination that burned away his fear and replaced it with cold, calculating fury. These machine-augmented monsters had just murdered thousands of innocent beings, and they thought they could continue their genocidal campaign unchallenged. They were about to learn that humanity had some surprises of its own. The command deck of the battleship Soul's Pride buzzed with urgent activity as Admiral Dong-hein studied the holographic display floating before his command chair. The massive vessel, humanity's most advanced warship, hung in space like a sleeping giant, its crew of 800 preparing for what might be their species' first major interstellar conflict. Around him, officers moved with the disciplined efficiency that had made Earth's Navy a force to be respected among the peaceful worlds of the galaxy. Admiral Communications Officer Park called out from his station. "We're receiving Captain Hayenwu's full intelligence package now. The data is ... disturbing." The holographic display shifted to show the Nexus 7 system, its planets now marked with the red indicators of Krillian occupation. The tactical readout painted a picture that would have made even the most optimistic. Military planner, consider retreat. 57 enemy vessels, each one equipped with technology that seemed to operate beyond the normal laws of physics. Energy shields that could absorb direct nuclear strikes. Cloaking devices that made their ships invisible to conventional sensors. AI systems that calculated battle outcomes with machine precision. Dong Haiyan, a veteran of 30 years in space, felt his jaw tighten as he absorbed the scope of what they were facing. At 52, he had commanded fleets through pirate raids, border disputes, and rescue operations. But nothing had prepared him for an enemy that viewed the extermination of organic life as a mathematical necessity. Chief Strategist the Jinn. "Your assessment," he ordered, his voice carrying the calm authority that had earned him respect throughout the human fleet. The Jinn stepped forward, her tablet displaying the analysis she had been conducting since the first reports arrived. At 35, she was the youngest chief strategist in fleet history. But her tactical mind had proven invaluable during Earth's expansion into contested space. Her dark eyes showed the intensity of someone who had spent the last 6 hours processing every detail of Krillian military doctrine. "Admiral, the situation is as bad as it appears," she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. "The Krillians possess superior firepower, better defensive systems, and numerical advantage. Their technology operates on principles we're still trying to understand. In a conventional engagement, we would last approximately 14 minutes. Before total fleet destruction." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed this assessment. 14 minutes. Against an enemy that had just wiped out an entire civilization in a matter of hours, humanity's most powerful fleet would survive less than a quarter of an hour, but the Jinn wasn't finished. "However, I've identified something interesting in there. Attack patterns on Nexus 7. The Krillians fought with perfect efficiency, yes, but also perfect predictability. Every move calculated, every strategy optimized for maximum results with minimum loss. We've never faced an enemy that doesn't follow logical military doctrine." Admiral Dong Haiyan leaned forward in his chair, sensing an opportunity in his strategist's words. "Explain." "Sir, the Krillians have spent centuries fighting technological peer civilizations that matched their advancement but lacked their ruthless efficiency. They've developed tactics based on the assumption that their enemies will always choose the most logical course of action. They've never encountered guerrilla warfare, sacrifice plays, or commanders willing to use damaged ships as weapons." Implications began to dawn on the bridge crew. Throughout human history, their species had excelled at asymmetric warfare, David against Goliath, small forces defeating larger ones through cunning, desperation, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat against an enemy that expected logical, predictable responses. Human unpredictability might be their greatest weapon in the ship's marine bay. Sergeant Soman addressed her soldiers with a kind of brutal honesty that had made her one of the most respected non-commissioned officers in the fleet. At 28, she had fought in the asteroid belt conflicts and the Titan uprising, earning decorations for valor that spoke to her willingness to lead from the front. "Listen up, Marines," she called out to the assembled troops, her voice cutting through the preparation noise like a blade. "We're about to face an enemy that thinks organic life is a disease to be cured. They've got better weapons, better armor, and they outnumber us 50 to 1. Any questions so far?" Young Marine raised his hand tentatively. "Sergeant, what are our chances?" Soman's grin was sharp enough to cut metal. "Our chances are exactly what we make them, Private. The Krillians think they know everything about warfare because they've been fighting civilizations that play by their rules. They've never fought humans. They've never faced soldiers who will turn a damaged ship into a guided missile, or Marines who consider a hopeless situation just another Tuesday." She gestured to the weapons being distributed among her troops. a mixture of conventional firearms and experimental technology that Earth scientists had been developing in secret. These machines think war is about calculations and probability matrices. We're about to teach them that war is about heart, guts, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect what you love. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, near Nexus 7, Krillian Commander Vextar reviewed the tactical data from his flagship's AI systems. The commander was a terrifying fusion of organic intelligence and mechanical enhancement. His original alien features now integrated with cybernetic implants that allowed him to interface directly with his ship's computers. "Report," he commanded, his voice carrying the synthesized tones of advanced vocal modifications. 6 primitive vessels approaching at suboptimal velocity, his tactical AI responded with mechanical precision. Species identified as human. Technology assessment: inferior propulsion, limited defensive systems, projectile-based weapons. Threat level: minimal. Vextar's mechanical eye focused on the display showing the approaching human ships. They were smaller than his destroyers, slower than his fighters, and armed with weapons that his AI classified as antiquated. The idea that these primitive scavengers would dare to challenge the Krillian Empire was almost amusing. "Detach destroyer, Group 7 to handle the approaching primitives," he ordered with the casual dismissal of someone swatting an insect. "Inform them that complete destruction is authorized. No prisoners are required." What Vextar couldn't know was that his assessment was both completely accurate and utterly wrong. The human ships were indeed smaller, slower, and less advanced than his fleet. But they were crewed by beings who had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting against impossible odds and finding ways to win anyway. Aboard the Soul's Pride, Admiral Donghayan received confirmation that the Krillians had dispatched only a fraction of their force to deal with the human fleet. 12 destroyers against 6 human ships, odds that any sane commander would consider suicide to face. Admiral the Jin reported, "The enemy has detached 12 vessels to intercept us. They're not even bringing their capital ships into the engagement. They think we're beneath their notice." Donghayan's smile was cold and calculating. "Their mistake. Signal all ships. Implement Protocol Omega. We're not here to win a conventional battle. We're here to teach these machines that humanity doesn't believe in impossible odds." The human fleet began to spread out in a formation that would have puzzled any conventional military analyst. Instead of maintaining tight formations for mutual support, they were scattering like prey animals fleeing a predator. 2 Krillian sensors. It looked like panic, but Captain Hyanwu, monitoring from his concealed position, recognized the pattern immediately. It was a formation his people had used against superior enemies for thousands of years, the setup for a coordinated strike that would hit the enemy where they least expected it. The Krillians were about to discover that humans had been fighting impossible battles since they first picked up rocks and decided to hunt creatures 10 times their size. They calculated probability and optimized for efficiency. Humans calculated how to turn their own deaths into weapons and optimized for making their enemies pay the highest price possible for every victory. The stage was set for a battle that would determine whether organic life had a future in this sector of the galaxy, or whether the Krillian vision of mechanical perfection would continue its inexorable march across the stars. The first Krillian salvo lit up space like a miniature star-going nova. 12 destroyer-class vessels unleashed their full firepower. Simultaneously, their plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes painting deadly streams of energy across the void. The attack was perfectly coordinated, mathematically precise, and utterly devastating. The human corvette Dauntless simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant by focused energy beams that turned its hull into superheated gas. A second later, the frigate Horizon's Edge suffered a direct hit to its reactor core, the resulting explosion creating a brief second sun that illuminated the faces of every human fighter pilot in the vicinity. Pilot Jinho felt his heart stop as he watched Taehyun's ship get caught in the blast wave. His childhood friend, his wingman for 3 years, his brother and everything but blood gone, in a flash of light that lasted less than a heartbeat. The cum channel that had been filled with Taehyun's nervous jokes and steady encouragement fell silent, replaced by the cold hiss of empty space. Taehyun. Ginho screamed into his microphone, knowing it was useless but unable to stop himself. Taehyun, respond. But there was no response. There would never be a response again. For a moment, Jinho's fighter drifted aimlessly as grief threatened to overwhelm him. The Krillian destroyers were already repositioning for their next volley, their AI systems calculating optimal firing solutions with mechanical precision. Logic said he should retreat, regroup with the surviving human ships, live to fight another day. Logic had never been humanity's strongest suit. All fighters continue attack pattern Delta, came Admiral Donghaen's voice over the come steady, and unwavering despite the losses. We knew this would cost us everything. Make every shot count. Jinho wiped the tears from his eyes and pushed his fighter's throttle to maximum. His ship, a sleek interceptor designed for reconnaissance rather than heavy combat, accelerated toward the nearest Krillian destroyer like a dart thrown by an angry god. The enemy vessel was 3 times the size of his entire ship, bristling with point defense weapons that could track and destroy, coming missiles with perfect accuracy. What they couldn't account for was a pilot who had stopped caring about his own survival. Jinho's fighter weaved through the defensive fire like a leaf in a hurricane, his hands moving across the controls with the fluid grace of someone who had been flying since he was old enough to reach the pedals. Plasma bolts seared past his canopy close enough to heat the metal, but somehow none of them found their mark. Behind him, 2 more human fighters followed his lead, their pilots inspired by his seemingly suicidal charge. Aboard the battleship Soul's Pride, engineer Suben worked with the frantic intensity of someone racing against time and physics. Station was a chaos of holographic displays and quantum processors, all focused on the impossible task of analyzing Krillian shield technology in real time. Every few seconds, the ship shuddered under enemy fire, sending her sprawling against her console, but she kept working. The shield harmonics are variable, but there's a pattern, she muttered to herself, her fingers flying across the interface as she processed terabytes of sensor data. They're rotating frequencies every 2.7 seconds to prevent exactly what I'm trying to do. A plasma bolt struck the ship's hull directly above her station, and the lights flickered as power conduits overloaded. Suben ignored the sparks raining down around her and continued her analysis. She was 26 years old, a prodigy who had graduated from Earth's most prestigious engineering academy at 19, and she had never faced a challenge that couldn't be solved with enough determination and caffeine. The Krillian shields were about to learn why that reputation was well earned. Got it, she announced triumphantly, uploading her findings to the ship's tactical systems. Their shields have a 17-millisecond vulnerability window during frequency transitions. It's not much, but if we can time our shots perfectly... Information flashed across every human ship in the fleet, and suddenly weapons that had been ineffective began finding their targets. Plasma bolts that should have been deflected punched through Krillian shields, causing the first real damage the enemy had sustained in the engagement. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Wujin had abandoned his normal duties to man one of the secondary weapon stations. Blood ran down his face from a head wound sustained when a bulkhead had exploded near his position, but his hands remained steady as he targeted the nearest Krillian vessel. As a medic, he had taken an oath to preserve life, but he had come to understand that sometimes the only way to save lives was to take them. Targeting solution locked, he reported, his voice calm despite the chaos around him, firing. The shot was perfectly timed to Suben's analysis, striking the enemy destroyer during its brief moment of vulnerability. The human weapon, primitive, by Krillian standards, punched through the alien shield and carved a molten furrow across the destroyer's hull. It wasn't enough to destroy the ship, but it was enough to prove that the enemy wasn't invincible. Commander Haewon watched the tactical display from the Marine Assault Bay, her mind racing as she calculated the odds of what she was about to attempt. The Krillian destroyer, inexorable, had taken minor damage from the human weapons fire, but its shields were already regenerating. In a few minutes, it would be back to full combat effectiveness, unless someone did something desperate and probably suicidal. "Marines, listen up," she announced to her assault team, her voice carrying the kind of absolute confidence that made soldiers follow officers into hell itself. We're going to board that destroyer and take it from the inside. The Krillians have never faced human marines in close combat. They're about to learn why that's a problem. The boarding torpedo launched from the Soul's Pride like a bullet fired from the barrel of God's own gun, designed to punch through enemy hulls and deliver assault teams directly into the heart of enemy vessels. It was one of humanity's more creative solutions to the problem of fighting superior technology. The Krillians detected the incoming projectile, but their AI systems classified it as a missile and responded with point defense fire designed to detonate explosive warheads. They weren't prepared for a projectile that was supposed to survive. Impact. The torpedo smashed through the destroyer's hull and deployed its deadly cargo. 12 human marines equipped with weapons designed for fighting in the cramped corridors of enemy ships. HFY led the charge into the Krillian vessel, her assault rifle chattering as she engaged mechanical defenders that moved with inhuman precision, but couldn't adapt to the chaos of close-quarters combat. But it was Captain Minho who provided the battle's most crucial moment. His ship, the cruiser Indomitable, had taken heavy damage from multiple Krillian vessels and was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. His engines were failing, his weapons were offline, and his crew was down to half strength. Any rationale? Commander would have ordered an immediate retreat. Minho had never been accused of being rational. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced over the ship's intercom, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would echo through history. "Prepare for ramming speed. We're going to punch a hole in their formation big enough for the rest of the fleet to exploit." His crew, men and women who had followed him through 3 years of deep space patrols, didn't hesitate. They strapped themselves into emergency positions and prepared to die for their species and their friends. The Indomitable turned toward the largest Krillian destroyer and accelerated to maximum velocity, her captain manually overriding every safety protocol that might have saved his ship. For Earth, Minho shouted into the com as his vessel smashed into the enemy destroyer like a meteor striking a planet. For humanity, for everyone who believes organic life deserves to exist. The explosion when the Indomitable's reactor core destabilized was visible from 3 star systems away. The Krillian destroyer, caught completely off guard by an attack that violated every principle of rational warfare, was torn apart by the blast. More importantly, the gap in their formation created exactly the opening that Admiral Donghain had been waiting for. The surviving human ships poured through the breach like water through a broken dam, their weapons targeting the damaged Krillian vessels with concentrated fire. For the first time in the battle, the technologically superior enemy found themselves on the defensive, struggling to respond to tactics that their AI systems couldn't predict or counter. Commander Vexstar, monitoring the battle from his flagship, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest: uncertainty. These primitive humans were fighting with a ferocity and unpredictability that defied all logical analysis. They sacrificed individual ships to save the fleet, used their own deaths as weapons, and continued fighting long past the point where any rational species would have surrendered. They were, he realized, with growing alarm, completely insane. And that insanity was winning. The battle had been raging for 47 minutes. And Commander Vexstar was beginning to understand that his mathematical models had failed to account for the most dangerous variable in the universe: human unpredictability. From his command throne aboard the flagship Dominion of Steel, he watched his perfectly coordinated fleet struggle against an enemy that seemed to operate by rules that violated every principle of logical warfare. On his tactical display, Krillian destroyers that should have maintained optimal spacing were being forced into chaotic formations. His human fighters darted between them like manic insects. The enemy ships moved in patterns that his AI systems kept flagging as tactically unsound. Probability of survival, negligible, yet somehow these supposedly doomed vessels kept achieving their objectives. Tactical assessment. Vexstar commanded his cybernetic implants interfacing directly with the ship's computer core. Analysis inconclusive. The AI responded with something that almost sounded like frustration. Human forces continue to violate standard combat doctrine. Their fighter craft are performing maneuvers that should result in pilot death from gravitational stress. yet survival rates remain at 87%. Recommended response protocols are insufficient. In 3 centuries of conquest, Vextar had never heard his tactical AI admit that its responses were insufficient. The Krillian Empire had conquered 47 star systems using the same mathematical approach to warfare: calculate optimal force deployment, identify enemy weaknesses, apply precise pressure until resistance collapsed. It had never failed. It was failing now. Captain Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of gravity, trying to crush him into his acceleration couch as his assault ship, Bloody Mary, performed another impossible turn, its hull groaning under stresses that should have torn it apart. Around him, his Marine assault team gripped their weapons with the casual competence of professionals who had trained for this moment their entire lives. Boarding action in 30 seconds, he announced over the comm, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had done this dozens of times before. Remember, these mechanical bastards think war is a math problem. We're about to show them it's an art form. Rodriguez was a third-generation Marine, his grandfather having fought in the Lunar Rebellion and his father in the asteroid mining wars. At 34, he had already led more boarding actions than any Marine in fleet history, earning a reputation for turning enemy vessels into what his troops cheerfully called floating tombs. The Bloody Mary slammed into the Krillian destroyer, precision strike with enough force to crack both hulls. But Rodriguez's ship had been specifically designed for ramming attacks. Shaped charges blew holes in the enemy vessel's armor, and magnetic grapples locked the two ships together in a deadly embrace. "Go, go, go," Rodriguez shouted, leading his Marines through the breach into the Krillian ship's corridors. The interior was a maze of mechanical efficiency, all clean lines and perfect angles designed by artificial minds that valued function over aesthetics. It was about to become a charnel house. The first Krillian defenders they encountered moved with inhuman precision, their cybernetic enhancements allowing them to calculate optimal firing positions and response times with computer-like accuracy. What they couldn't calculate was Rodriguez's willingness to use their own efficiency against them. "Frag out," called, rolling a grenade down a corridor that the enemy AI had calculated as tactically secure. The explosion sent shrapnel ricocheting off metal walls in patterns that no computer could predict. When the smoke cleared, 3 Krillian warriors lay dismantled on the deck. His Marines flowed through the ship like water finding cracks in a dam, their movements coordinated but flexible, adapting to enemy responses faster than the Krillian AI could process new tactical solutions. They fought with a combination of mathematical precision and predatory instinct that their enemies simply couldn't comprehend in the fighter squadrons. Pilot Jinho had discovered something remarkable about human physiology that the Krillians had missed in their assessment. While other species were limited by their evolutionary adaptations, humans seemed capable of surviving situations that should have killed them through sheer bloody-minded determination. "Phoenix leader to all fighters," he transmitted, his voice steady, despite pulling 7 Gs in a turn that would have liquefied most organic beings. "The enemy's tracking our flight patterns, but they're calculating based on what we should be able to survive, not what we actually can survive. Push your birds harder than physics says you can." The human fighters responded by performing maneuvers that violated every safety protocol in the book. They dove between Krillian capital ships with inches to spare, used debris fields as cover while pulling turns that should have snapped their spines, and somehow managed to maintain formation while their enemies' targeting computers struggled to track targets moving in impossible trajectories. What the Krillians couldn't understand was that human pilots had been pushing the boundaries of what was survivable since their species first looked at the sky and decided they wanted to fly. Every human fighter jockey was descended from ancestors who had climbed into primitive aircraft made of wood and fabric, or strapped themselves to rockets and hurled themselves into space, or performed aerial maneuvers that killed as many pilots as enemy action. They were evolution's most successful risk-takers, and they had turned that evolutionary advantage into a military doctrine. But perhaps most disturbing to the Krillian command was the attitude displayed by the human forces. While other species fought with grim determination or desperate fury, The humans seemed to approach warfare with something that could only be described as professional enthusiasm. Their communications channels were filled with what their translators identified as humor and casual competence. Tango 3, you've got a bogey on your 6, came one transmission that Vexstar intercepted. Copy that lead. Hey, want to see something funny? The human fighter designated Tango 3 performed a maneuver that involved flying directly at a Krillian destroyer, pulling up at the last possible second, and somehow causing the enemy ship's point defense systems to target each other in confusion. The resulting damage was minimal, but the psychological impact on the Krillian crew was significant. They were being outfought by an enemy that treated combat like a game. Phoenix 2, nice shot on that destroyer sensor array, another pilot commented after landing a particularly difficult hit. Thanks, but I was actually aiming for their main gun. Happy accidents, you know. Happy accidents. The human pilot had missed his intended target, struck a different system entirely, and somehow achieved a better tactical result than he had planned. The Krillian AI system spent precious processing cycles trying to determine if this was part of some sophisticated deception protocol or genuine incompetence that had produced superior outcomes. Warlord Krex Vexter, a second-in-command, watched the tactical display with growing unease. The Krillian fleet still outnumbered the humans significantly, still possessed superior technology, still held every theoretical advantage, yet somehow they were losing ships at an unacceptable rate. While the human forces continued to adapt and evolve their tactics in real time, Commander, he reported to Vexstar, our preliminary assessment of human combat capabilities appears to have been inadequate. These primitive forces are employing military doctrines that our strategic databases cannot classify. Vexstar. Mechanical eyes focused on the battle display, watching as a human cruiser sacrificed itself in a ramming attack that created exactly the opening needed for 2 frigates to exploit a weakness in the Krillian formation. The move had been tactically brilliant, strategically sound, and emotionally devastating to witness. Explain, he commanded. The humans appear to wage war using a combination of mathematical precision and what our analysts can only describe as controlled chaos, Krex continued. They calculate optimal outcomes and deliberately introduce variables that make their actions unpredictable to enemy tactical systems. They fight like computers that have learned to improvise. That assessment sent a chill through Vexstar's cybernetic consciousness. The Krillian Empire had built its military superiority on the premise that logic and calculation would always triumph over emotion and instinct. They had conquered dozens of species by outthinking them, outplanning them, outcalculating them. But humans seem to have found a way to combine logical analysis with intuitive leaps, creating a military philosophy that was simultaneously rational and completely unpredictable. They were fighting like the best of both worlds, the precision of machines combined with the creativity of evolved consciousness. As another Krillian destroyer exploded under concentrated human fire, Vexstar realized that his inferior prey species assessment had been more than wrong. It had been catastrophically, dangerously wrong. These humans weren't primitive scavengers stumbling into a fight. They couldn't win. They were apex predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things bigger and stronger than themselves. And they were very good at it. The battlefield stretched endlessly before Commander Thesis, a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and burning debris. Smoke rose from countless craters where Vorthok plasma cannons had torn apart the Earth just hours before, yet somehow, impossibly, the humans were winning. Thesis crouched behind a damaged human transport vehicle, watching in disbelief as enemy soldiers moved with purpose through the chaos. Their weapons had changed 3 times since morning. Started as primitive kinetic rifles, now hummed with energy modifications that shouldn't have been possible to create in a war zone. Human engineers worked frantically under enemy fire, welding new components onto weapon barrels while medics dragged wounded fighters back to improvised field hospitals. How are they doing this? This is whispered into his communicator, speaking to his aide back at headquarters. The response crackled through static. Sir, our intelligence reports indicate the humans are modifying their equipment faster than we can counter it. They're learning from every engagement. Learning. That word had haunted Thesis for weeks now. The Vorthok had expected to crush these strange bipeds within days, just as they had conquered the Zilani Empire. The Crystalline Collective and 17 other civilizations, fear and overwhelming firepower had always been enough. Humans seemed immune to both. A nearby explosion shook the ground, and Thesis watched a human soldier emerge from the smoke. Half his armor was melted away, revealing burned flesh underneath. Any sane being would retreat for medical attention. Instead, the human grabbed a fallen comrade's weapon, checked its ammunition, and continued advancing toward Vorthok positions. Memetic. The wounded soldier called out, not for himself, but for another human lying near a destroyed bunker. A medical team appeared within seconds, their movements precise despite the chaos around them. Thesis observed as they worked on a soldier whose injuries should have been fatal. Missing limb, severe burns, obvious internal damage. Yet within minutes, they had the wounded fighter stabilized and conscious. "Can you move?" one medic asked. "Give me something for the pain and a weapon," came the reply. This was wrong. This violated every rule of warfare this is understood. Creatures were supposed to fear death, to retreat when faced with impossible odds. They were supposed to break when their leaders fell and scatter when their weapons failed. Humans did none of these things. A young human officer approached Thesis' hiding spot. Moving with casual confidence, despite enemy fire whistling overhead, "Commander Thesis, right? I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen. We're moving on their command post in 10 minutes. Want to see how we do it?" Thesis stared at her. She couldn't be more than 20 standard cycles old, yet she spoke as if victory was already certain. "You're inviting me to join your assault? Why not? You've been watching us fight for days. Might as well see it up close." Chen checked her rifle, a weapon that looked completely different from the one she'd carried that morning. "Besides, your reports back home will be more accurate if you witness this firsthand." Against all tactical sense, Thesis found himself following the human assault team as they prepared for their attack. 12 soldiers, each carrying modified weapons and equipment that defied Vorthok understanding. Their leader, a grizzled sergeant named Rodriguez, gathered them around a hastily drawn map. "Intel says they've got 40 defenders in that complex," Rodriguez explained, pointing to a fortified position 300 meters away. "Standard Vorthok defensive pattern, overlapping fields of fire, automated turrets on the corners. We're outnumbered 3-1, facing superior firepower in a fortified position," one soldier observed. "Sounds like Tuesday." The others laughed. Actually laughed. Thesis felt his confidence in Vorthok's superiority crumble a little more. "Martinez, you and Thompson take the left flank," Rodriguez continued. "Jenkins, Williams, you're with me through the center. Chen, take your team around the right side. Remember, we're not just trying to win this fight. We're making sure they can never use these tactics against anyone else again." That phrase sent chills through Thesis. Humans didn't fight just to defeat enemies. They fought to eliminate threats permanently. Every battle was also a learning experience. Every victory, a step toward making their opponents obsolete. The assault began with precision that would have impressed Vorthok military instructors. Human soldiers moved like flowing water, adapting instantly to changing conditions. When automated turrets opened fire, they didn't retreat. Instead, engineers emerged from cover with devices that jammed the targeting systems. When Vorthok defenders shifted positions, human communications equipment that had been silent suddenly burst to life, coordinating responses faster than thought. Thesis watched a human medic treat wounds that should have been immediately fatal. Using techniques and equipment that evolved before his eyes, soldiers shared ammunition, modified weapons mid-battle, and maintained communication networks that reorganized themselves every few minutes. Their command structure was unlike anything in Vorthok military doctrine. Orders flowed in all directions. Initiative was encouraged at every level. Failure was treated as valuable information rather than shame. "How do you coordinate all this?" Thesis asked Chen, as she prepared a charge that would breach the enemy's main defensive wall. "We don't, not the way you think," she replied, making final adjustments to an explosive device that combined Vorthok energy cells with human timing mechanisms. Everyone knows the mission. Everyone's trained to think, not just follow orders. When something doesn't work, we try something else immediately. The breach charge detonated with devastating effect. But that wasn't what shocked Theseus most. What amazed him was how quickly the humans adapted when the explosion revealed unexpected defensive positions. Within seconds, their assault plan changed completely. Soldiers who had been advancing suddenly provided covering fire, while others flanked positions that hadn't existed on their maps. Contact left. Someone shouted, and instantly half the team shifted to address a threat that tactical doctrine said should have required new orders from headquarters. But there were no new orders. Each human soldier assessed the situation, made decisions, and acted with terrifying efficiency. They fought as if every individual was a complete military unit capable of independent thought and action. The Vorthok defenders, trained in rigid hierarchy and standardized responses, couldn't adapt fast enough. Their weapons were individually superior, their armor more advanced, their positions better fortified. None of it mattered. Humans attacked problems their equipment couldn't handle by modifying their equipment. They overcame tactical disadvantages. By changing tactics mid-battle, it turned every setback into useful information. When the battle ended 27 minutes later, Theseus stood among the ruins of what had been an impregnable Vorthok position. Human casualties had been surprisingly light, despite facing superior numbers and firepower. More disturbing was the realization that everything the humans had learned here would be shared with every other human unit within hours. Why? Asked Rodriguez as medics treated both human and Vorthok, wounded with equal care. Why fight this way? Why not just win and move on? The sergeant looked at him with something that might have been pity, because winning isn't enough. If we just defeat you, you'll recover and threaten someone else someday. But if we completely understand how you fight, if we solve every tactical problem you can present, then no one will ever have to face this threat again. That night, as Theseus transmitted his report to Vorthok High Command, he struggled to find words that would convey what he had witnessed. How could he explain that humans treated warfare like a science experiment? That they approached impossible odds as interesting puzzles? That they fought not just to win battles, but to make entire categories of future conflict obsolete? The Vorthok Empire had conquered dozens of civilizations by being stronger, faster, and more ruthless than their enemies. But strength meant nothing against opponents who grew stronger during battle. Speed was useless against enemies who adapted faster than conditions could change. And ruthlessness was irrelevant when facing beings who viewed near-certain death as merely another variable to account for in their calculations. As dawn broke over the battlefield, Theseus watched human engineers, already working on new weapon modifications based on intelligence gathered during the night assault, medical teams, shared treatment innovations discovered while saving lives under fire, communication specialists refined coordination, protocols that would make tomorrow's operations even more effective. The Vorthok had always believed that fear was the ultimate weapon. But humans had found something more powerful: the absolute refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. They didn't fight to avoid losing. They fought to ensure victory was inevitable. For the first time in his military career, Commander Theseus understood what true terror felt like. Part 6. The new galactic order. The silence in space was deafening. Where once the thunderous roar of Vorthok war fleets had echoed across the void, now only scattered debris drifted between the stars. Commander Theseus floated in his escape pod, watching the last remnants of his empire's mighty armada flee in all directions. Behind them, human vessels moved with methodical precision, not in pursuit of revenge, but in the systematic elimination of a threat that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Through his pod's viewport, Theseus could see Admiral Chen's flagship, the Use Defiance, coordinating the pursuit with cold efficiency. Human destroyers peeled off in calculated formations, each targeting specific escape routes. This wasn't the chaotic aftermath of battle that the Theseus had witnessed in previous conquests. The humans were conducting a surgical operation to ensure the Vorthok Empire could never regroup, never threaten innocent lives again, A gentle impact against his pod's hull made Theseus flinch, expecting death. Instead, a human rescue craft had docked with his vessel. The airlock cycled open, and a young human medic floated inside, the medical scanner already in hand. "Are you injured?" she asked in perfect Vorthok, her voice carrying genuine concern despite the circumstances. Theseus stared at her in confusion. Hours ago, this same species had been systematically dismantling his fleet. Now they were offering medical aid to their enemies. "I don't understand," he managed to say. "The war's over," the medic replied simply, running her scanner over his body. "You're not a threat anymore, so you're a patient. Minor radiation exposure, some dehydration, nothing serious." As the rescue craft transported him to the human command ship, Theseus observed the organized chaos of post-battle operations. Human vessels had already established field hospitals in space, treating wounded from both sides with equal care. Engineering ships were collecting salvageable materials while others hunted down the last fleeing Vorthok vessels. The efficiency was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure aboard the Defiance. Admiral Chen greeted Theseus personally in the medical bay. The human leader looked exhausted but determined, her uniform bearing scorch marks from the battle. "Commander Theseus, I presume?" "I'm Admiral Sarah Chen. We need to talk." "About surrender terms?" Theseus asked, expecting the usual demands for tribute and submission. Chen shook her head. "About transition. The Vorthok Empire is finished. The question now is what happens to your people and the civilizations you've conquered." The Admiral led him to an observation deck, where massive view screens displayed the broader situation across multiple star systems. Theseus watched in amazement as human forces appeared in system after system, engaging Vorthok garrisons that had been left to maintain control over conquered worlds. But these weren't conquest fleets. They were liberation forces. Zalani Prime, Crystalline Collective Homeworld, 17 other systems, Chen explained, pointing to different displays. "Our forces arrived simultaneously 47 minutes ago. Synchronized emergence from hyperspace across 1,000 light-years. Every Vorthok stronghold, every garrison, every administrative center." The scale of coordination required for such an operation was beyond anything Theseus could comprehend. "How is this possible?" "We spent 3 months learning everything about your empire while you thought you were winning," Chen replied. "Every battle, every engagement taught us more about your organization, your supply lines, your command structure. We didn't just plan to defeat your fleet. We planned to dismantle your entire civilization." On the screens, this is watched as human forces systematically liberated world after world. But what shocked him most was what happened after the fighting ended. Instead of claiming these worlds for Earth, human engineers immediately began working with local populations to rebuild infrastructure. Medical teams provided aid regardless of species. Agricultural specialists shared advanced farming techniques. With populations that had been kept deliberately malnourished by Vorthok occupation. "Why?" Theseus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why help them? You could rule these worlds." Admiral Chen looked at him with something approaching sadness. "Because ruling through fear and oppression is what the Vorthok did. We've seen where that leads." A new display activated, showing Zalani Prime in real time. The planet's surface, scarred by years of occupation, was already showing signs of recovery. Human construction crews worked alongside Zalani survivors to rebuild cities. Agricultural teams were revitalizing farmlands that had been strip-mined for resources. Most remarkably, human teachers were establishing schools where Zalani children could learn their own history and culture, knowledge that the Vorthok had tried to erase. "The Zalani called us for help," Chen continued. "But every species you conquered deserves the same chance at freedom. It's not something we can give them by conquest. It's something they have to build for themselves." Over the following weeks, as Theseus served as an unofficial liaison between humans and Vorthok survivors, he witnessed the most extraordinary transformation in galactic history. Human forces didn't occupy liberated worlds. They provided security while local populations rebuilt their governments. Human technology wasn't kept secret. It was shared freely with anyone who could use it constructively. Human military doctrine. wasn't imposed. Instead, species were encouraged to develop their own defensive capabilities. The process wasn't without challenges. Some Vorthok military units refused to surrender, forcing human forces to hunt them down across dozens of systems. Some liberated populations were too traumatized to trust any outsiders, requiring careful diplomatic work. Some worlds had been so devastated that reconstruction seemed impossible, but humans approached each problem with the same methodical determination they had. Shown in battle, psychologists worked with traumatized populations. Engineers developed new techniques for planetary restoration. Diplomats learned dozens of languages and cultural practices to communicate effectively with different species. Dices found himself spending most of his time with Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, and a human xenobiologist who was documenting Vorthok culture. In history, her goal wasn't to judge or condemn, but to understand how an entire civilization had become dedicated to conquest and oppression. Every species has the capacity for both creation and destruction, she explained during one of their sessions. The Vorthok chose destruction for so long that you forgot how to create, but that doesn't mean the knowledge is gone forever. She was working with surviving Vorthok civilians to preserve their art, literature, and scientific achievements that had existed before the Empire's militaristic transformation. Museums were being established to remember both the beauty and the horror of Vorthok civilization, ensuring that future generations would understand the full consequences of choosing violence over cooperation. The most surprising development came when representatives from dozens of species began arriving at human command centers, not as refugees or conquered peoples, but as potential allies. The Crystalline Collective offered to share their advanced crystal technology. The Zelani provided detailed star charts of unknown regions. Former Vorthok client species brought intelligence about other threats lurking in distant galaxies. They're not just grateful, Admiral Chen explained to Lises during their final meeting before his departure. They're hopeful. For the first time in generations, they believe the galaxy can be safe. A new organization was forming, with Earth as a founding member, but not the controlling power. The Galactic Cooperative Defense Alliance would share technology, coordinate responses to threats, and ensure that no single species could ever again terrorize entire sectors of space. Humans would serve as troubleshooters and emergency responders. The species others called when conventional solutions failed, as Dices prepared to depart for the new Vorthok settlement worlds. He reflected on everything he had witnessed. The humans had demonstrated that overwhelming force could be used to create rather than destroy, that victory could lead to healing rather than domination. They had shown the galaxy a different way of existing. "What will you do now?" Dr. Martinez asked as they said goodbye. "Learn," Dices replied. "Learn how to build instead of destroy. Learn how to help instead of harm. The humans have shown us it's possible." Months later, reports began filtering through galactic communication networks. A mining colony threatened by asteroid storms called for help, and human engineering teams arrived within days to provide protection. A plague outbreak on a remote world brought human medical specialists with treatments and vaccines. Pirates threatening trade routes found themselves facing coordinated response teams from multiple species, trained in human tactical doctrine. The galaxy was learning that Earth's children were equally capable of devastating warfare and miraculous healing, solving impossible problems and defeating unbeatable enemies. They had become the species others turned to when hope seemed lost, and the odds appeared insurmountable. In the end, humanity's greatest conquest wasn't territory or resources. It was the simple but revolutionary idea that strength should be used to protect rather than oppress, and that true victory meant ensuring everyone could live without fear. The age of the Vorthok Empire was over, but the age of galactic cooperation had just begun.